The emergency lights bathed the Galactic Council chamber in deep red. Ambassador Zelnath's tentacles trembled as she inserted the data crystal into the central display. Around her, representatives from 50 different species watched in growing horror. The hologram showed a Zephrani mining colony on the outer rim. Workers moved through their daily routines when suddenly one collapsed. Then another. Within minutes, dozens fell to the ground, their bodies breaking apart into fine, glittering dust. The recording ended with the camera operator's breathing becoming ragged. Then nothing but the sound of crystalline particles hitting the floor. "This was 3 weeks ago," Zelnath said, her voice barely steady. "Since then, we have lost contact with 47 colonies across 6 star systems. The Vrex ambassador, a massive creature covered in armor-like scales, stood up. The Vrex Empire does not fall to disease. Our medical technology—" "Your medical technology means nothing," interrupted the Kothari representative. Her feathers, usually bright blue, had faded to gray. "We received a distress signal from one of your military outposts yesterday. By the time our ships arrived, everyone was dead. 8,000 of your finest warriors reduced to dust." The council erupted in panicked voices. Species that had been enemies for centuries now faced a common threat that didn't care about borders or old feuds. The plague, which they had started calling the Silence for how it left worlds eerily quiet, spread faster than anyone could track. 3 star systems away, Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the human exploration vessel Perseverance. They were 2 years into a 5-year mission to map the outer territories when her communications officer picked up something strange. "Captain, I'm getting a weak distress signal," Lieutenant Kumar said. "It's an Altarian ship, but the message keeps cutting out." Sarah frowned. The Altarians were master engineers, their ships among the most reliable in the galaxy. For one to send a distress signal meant something had gone very wrong. "How far?" she asked. 6 hours at maximum speed." Sarah made the decision that would change humanity's fate forever. "Set course to intercept. Tell the crew to prepare for rescue operations." When they arrived, the Altarian vessel drifted in space like a ghost ship. Its lights flickered weakly, and Sarah could see that parts of the hull had strange crystalline formations growing on them. "Life signs?" she asked. "Minimal. Maybe 5 or 6, but the readings are weak and getting weaker." Sarah's first officer, Commander Zhang, looked worried. "Captain, we've been getting reports from the inner colonies about some kind of plague. Maybe we should—" "We're not leaving people to die in space," Sarah said firmly. "Get a medical team ready. Full contamination protocols." The boarding team found a nightmare inside the Altarian ship. The corridors were covered in crystalline dust that had once been living beings. They moved carefully through the ship, their boots crunching on what remained of the crew. In the medical bay, they found 6 Altarians still alive, but barely. Their skin was already starting to crack and flake. "Get them to our ship," Sarah ordered. "Quickly!" Dr. Elizabeth Harper, the ship's chief medical officer, worked frantically to save the Altarians. She tried everything: antibiotics, antivirals, even experimental treatments. Nothing worked. One by one, the refugees died, their bodies crumbling into that same terrible dust. But something strange happened. Or rather, didn't happen. 3 days passed, then a week. The human crew that had brought the Altarians aboard, who had breathed the same air and touched the same surfaces, remained perfectly healthy. Dr. Harper ran test after test, finding traces of the plague in their systems, but their bodies seemed to ignore it completely. "This doesn't make sense," she told Sarah. "According to these readings, we should all be dead. The pathogen is in our blood, our lungs, everywhere. But it's just sitting there, like our bodies don't even recognize it as a threat." Sarah stared at the test results. "You're saying we're immune?" "I'm saying we're something beyond immune. Our bodies aren't even fighting it. It's as if the plague doesn't know what to do with human biology." Back at the Galactic Council, the situation grew desperate. The minded ones, telepathic beings who could usually sense danger before it arrived, were dying in waves. The plague had learned to travel through their mental connections, spreading from mind to mind faster than light. The Etherean Coalition, with all their advanced energy manipulation, tried to burn the plague out of infected individuals. It only made the victims die faster, their bodies crystallizing from the inside out. Every countermeasure failed. Every cure made things worse. The plague seemed to learn, to adapt, becoming more efficient with each species it encountered. Ambassador Zelnath received the emergency transmission from the Perseverance with skepticism. Humans claiming immunity, they were one of the youngest species in the galaxy, their technology primitive compared to the great civilizations now falling to dust. But as report after report came in of human colonies remaining unaffected, even when refugee ships brought infected aliens to their doorsteps, hope began to flicker. The human ambassador to the Galactic Council, David Okafor, found himself suddenly the most important person in the room. Where once the other species had barely noticed humanity's presence, now all eyes turned to him. "We need your medical data," the Vrex ambassador said, no longer bothering with his usual tone of superiority. "Everything about human biology, your immune systems, your DNA." David nodded slowly. "We'll share everything we have. But first we need to establish quarantine protocols. Our immunity doesn't mean we can save you. Not yet." The truth was harder than anyone wanted to admit. Humans could walk through plague zones unharmed, but they couldn't stop others from dying. They could only watch as entire civilizations crumbled to dust around them. On Earth, the government faced an impossible situation. Alien refugees begged for sanctuary, but bringing them to Earth meant watching them die on human soil. The images from the quarantine zones were heartbreaking. Alien children reaching through barriers toward human workers who couldn't save them. Diplomatic leaders who once commanded vast fleets now gasping their last breaths in hospital beds. Dr. James Okonkwo, Earth's leading xenobiologist, worked day and night analyzing the data from the Perseverance and other human ships that had encountered the plague. What he found challenged everything they knew about evolution. "Human DNA contains something unique," he reported to the emergency assembly, "a protein structure that shouldn't exist, that defies conventional understanding of biology. It's as if our evolution prepared us for this specific threat." "How is that possible?" asked the Earth's president. "I don't know," James admitted. "But right now we need to focus on finding out why we're immune, and whether we can transfer that immunity to other species. The entire galaxy is counting on us." As the death toll climbed into the trillions, human ships became the only vessels that could safely travel between infected worlds. They transported what supplies they could, carried final messages from dying worlds to their colonies, and searched desperately for anything that might lead to a cure. Sarah Chen, promoted to admiral for her discovery of human immunity, led the effort to coordinate relief efforts. But for every small victory, a colony evacuated before the plague arrived, critical data saved from a dying research station, there were 100 defeats. Entire species vanished in days. Ancient cultures that had existed for millions of years disappeared, leaving only crystalline dust and empty cities. The galaxy was dying, and humanity, barely a century into their membership in the galactic community, found themselves standing alone against an enemy they couldn't fight, only survive. The burden of being immune weighed on every human soul. They were witnesses to the greatest extinction event in galactic history, unable to do anything but watch and document the end of civilizations far greater than their own. In the council chambers, now mostly empty as representatives either died or fled to spend their last days with their species, Ambassador Okafor stood before the remaining members. "We will not stop trying," he promised. "Humanity may be young, we may be primitive by your standards, but we will not abandon you. We will find a way." Outside the great windows of the council chamber, the stars continued to shine, but fewer ships moved between them. The silence was spreading, and humanity stood as the only voice left that could speak for the dying galaxy. The Galactic Council's research station orbited a dying star, its massive structure now feeling empty with only a fraction of its scientists still alive. Dr. James Okonkwo stepped off the human transport ship with his team of 12 researchers, their footsteps echoing in corridors that once bustled with thousands of beings from across the galaxy. The Etherian scientist who greeted them, Dr. Velnash, was one of the last of her kind. Her energy form flickered weakly, held together by a containment suit that hummed with effort. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely a whisper through the translator. "We have prepared everything we could before—" She paused, unable to finish the sentence. James placed his hand gently on the containment suit, a gesture that would have meant nothing weeks ago but now carried the weight of being possibly the last friendly touch Velnash would know from another sapient being. "Show us your research," he said. "We'll continue your work." The main laboratory was a testament to desperation. Data screens covered every wall, showing genetic sequences, molecular structures, and failed experiment after failed experiment. The plague had been analyzed from every possible angle, yet it remained a mystery that defied all understanding. "Watch this," Belnash said, bringing up a holographic display. It showed the plague pathogen attacking a Vrex cell. The organism seemed to analyze the cell's structure, then produce the exact enzyme needed to break it down. When they introduced a Kothari cell, the plague changed completely, creating different enzymes perfect for destroying that species' biology. "It learns," James observed. "More than that," Belnash corrected. "It perfects itself for each species it encounters, except humans." She switched the display to show human cells exposed to the plague. The pathogen approached, seemed to probe the cell wall, then simply stopped. It floated there, inert as if confused. Dr. Lisa Chang, one of James's team members, leaned closer. "It's like it doesn't recognize us as organic life." "We thought the same," Belnash said. "But look at this." She showed them a detailed scan of human DNA, highlighting a specific protein structure that spiraled in an unusual pattern. This protein shouldn't exist according to standard biological models. It violates 3 fundamental laws of molecular biology. Yet here we are, James said, studying the data. Living, breathing violations of nature. Across the galaxy, the social order that had existed for millennia crumbled in weeks. The Vrex Empire, which had never lost a war in 10,000 years, sent their last functioning battleship to Earth with a simple message. "Please help us." The ship's commander, General Crackstor, stood before the United Nations Assembly. His proud bearing was gone, replaced by something humans had never seen in a Vrex before: fear. "My empire had 8 billion citizens 3 weeks ago," he said, his translator struggling with the emotion in his voice. "We now number less than 1 million. We are warriors, conquerors, the strongest military force the galaxy has ever known. And we are begging you, a species we once considered barely worthy of notice, to save us." Earth's President, Maria Rodriguez, responded with compassion rather than the vindication some might have expected. "General, humanity will do everything in our power to help. Not because we seek your submission, but because it's the right thing to do." But what could they do? Human medical ships traveled to Vrex colonies, setting up sterile zones where the dying could at least pass with some comfort. Human doctors and nurses held the clawed hands of Vrex warriors as they crumbled to dust, offering what comfort they could to beings who had never known defeat. On the paradise world of Cytheria, home to the telepathic-minded ones, the situation was even more desperate. These beings, who had guided galactic civilization with their wisdom for eons, were dying not just physically but mentally. As their peers died, the survivors felt each death through their mental network, experiencing the terror and pain thousands of times over. The last elder of the minded ones, a being so old that stars had been born and died during its lifetime, sent a final message to humanity through great effort. "You are always an enigma to us," the message said. "Your minds are closed, chaotic, impossible for us to read clearly. We thought this made you inferior. Now we understand your chaos, your unpredictability. It saved you. Remember us, humans. Remember that we were wrong about you." Dr. Fatima al-Rashid worked in the largest quarantine facility on Earth's moon. Every day, ships arrived carrying alien refugees who had nowhere else to go. They knew they would die here, but at least they would die among those who could remember them. She sat with a young Altarian engineer named Hextall, who had maybe hours left before the crystallization process completed. His species had built wonders, cities that floated in gas giants, stations that could harness the power of black holes. Now he could barely lift his hand. "I had plans," he whispered to Fatima. "I was going to design a new type of faster-than-light drive. My partner and I were going to have children. We were going to explore the galaxy." Fatima held his hand carefully, feeling it begin to crack under her gentle touch. "Tell me about the drive. I promise someone will build it." As Hextall spoke, she recorded everything. Not just the technical specifications, but his dreams, his hopes, the small jokes his partner would tell. When he finally crumbled to dust an hour later, Fatima carefully collected the crystalline remains in a special container, marked with his name and species. The moon facility had millions of such containers now, each one representing a life, a story, a future that would never be. The psychological toll on humanity grew unbearable. Suicide rates among medical workers skyrocketed. Those who worked in the quarantine zones often couldn't sleep, haunted by the faces of those they couldn't save. Support groups formed for what they called survivor's guilt on a galactic scale. Marcus Rodriguez, a colony engineer on Mars, watched his wife die over the course of 3 days. She was Etherian, her energy form slowly dispersing as the plague destroyed her ability to maintain cohesion. He had built a special containment unit for her, working frantically to improve it to give her just a few more hours. "Don't blame yourself," she told him as her form flickered. "Love doesn't care about species. You gave me 5 wonderful years. That's more than the plague can take away." When she finally dissipated, Marcus stood in the empty containment unit for hours, unable to move, unable to cry, unable to process that the being he loved more than life itself was simply gone. Back at the research station, James's team made a disturbing discovery. The protein structure that made humans immune wasn't random. It followed a mathematical pattern that appeared in only one other place in nature: the energy signatures from ancient ruins scattered across the galaxy. These ruins predate all known civilizations by millions of years, Lisa Chang reported. We always assumed they were from some extinct species. But what if they were built by whoever created this plague? "You're suggesting the plague is artificial?" James asked. "I'm suggesting that either the plague is artificial or human evolution was somehow guided to be immune to it. Either option is terrifying." The Galactic Council, now reduced to only 15 member species from the original 50, called an emergency session. They needed to decide whether to pool all remaining resources into finding a cure or to accept extinction and focus on preserving their cultures and knowledge for humanity to remember. Ambassador Okafor stood before the empty seats that once held voices from across the galaxy. "Humanity refuses to accept that this is the end. We've lost too much to give up now. Dr. Okonkwo's team has found something, a connection between human immunity and the ancient ruins. We're requesting permission to investigate the restricted sites." The Kothari representative, her feathers now completely gray, spoke softly. "Those sites are forbidden for good reason. The energy readings from them have killed everyone who got too close. Everyone except possibly humans," David pointed out. "We won't know unless we try." The vote was unanimous. What did they have left to lose? As human expeditions prepared to enter sites that had been forbidden for thousands of years, the galaxy held what was left of its breath. The death toll had reached an incomprehensible scale. Entire sectors of space were now silent, filled with ghost ships and empty worlds covered in crystalline dust that sparkled in the light of stars that no longer had anyone to name them. Humanity found itself the sole inheritor of a dying galaxy's hope, carrying the weight of preserving not just lives but entire civilizations' worth of culture, knowledge, and dreams. They were no longer just another young species finding their way among the stars. They were the anomaly that might save everyone, or be left to wander alone among the ruins of a once thriving galactic community. The dead world had no name, only a designation: PKX 7742. It hung in space like a gray marble, its surface scarred by massive craters and covered in strange, geometric patterns that could only be seen from orbit. This was where the strongest predecessor ruins had been detected, and where 17 previous expeditions had ended in death. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Perseverance, now retrofitted with equipment salvaged from a dozen dying civilizations. Beside her, wearing a heavily modified environmental suit, stood the last surviving Vrek scientist, Dr. Thrax. His breathing was labored, and Sarah could see the early signs of crystallization on his scales. "I have perhaps 6 days," Thrax said bluntly. "I intend to use them well." The expedition team consisted of 30 humans and 12 aliens from various species, all in different stages of infection. They had volunteered knowing they would die, but hoping their deaths might mean something. "Take us down," Sarah ordered. The predecessor ruins stretched for miles across the planet's surface, towers of an unknown metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The moment the human team stepped onto the surface, their instruments went crazy. Energy readings that should have killed them instantly washed over them harmlessly. Dr. James Okonkwo led the science team deeper into the complex. The architecture was impossible. Corridors that seemed to fold in on themselves, rooms where gravity flowed sideways, chambers that were somehow bigger on the inside than the outside. It's like whoever built this wasn't constrained by normal physics, Lisa Chang observed, running her hand along a wall that felt warm despite reading as absolute zero on her instruments. They found the first hologram in what appeared to be a control room. It activated when James approached, showing a being unlike anything in the galactic database. It stood 12 feet tall, with a body that seemed to shift between solid and energy states. When it spoke, the words appeared directly in their minds, translated perfectly despite being in no known language. "You who carry the mark," it said, "you have arrived too early. The cleansing is not complete." James stepped forward. "Are you the predecessors? Did you create the plague?" The hologram flickered, and suddenly they weren't in the control room anymore. They stood in a vast space filled with stars, watching as shapes moved between dimensions, beings of pure entropy that devoured everything they touched. "We were guardians," the predecessor's voice explained. "When the devourers came from outside reality, we fought them for 10,000 years. Worlds burned, species died, reality itself began to break down. The vision showed massive battles, weapons that deleted portions of space-time, entire star systems being converted into barriers between dimensions. And through it all, the devourers kept coming, learning, adapting. We created the ultimate defense," the predecessor continued, "a biological weapon that would cleanse the galaxy of all life that could be corrupted by the devourers. Only those with the mark would survive, those whose biology was incompatible with their influence. But we're human," James protested. "We didn't exist when you were alive." The hologram showed a new image, Earth millions of years ago. A predecessor ship crashed into the ocean, its pilot dying but not before releasing something into the water. A genetic marker that would slowly, over eons, work its way into the evolutionary chain. "We seeded many worlds," the predecessor explained. "Most failed. The markers were lost or diluted. On your world, by chance or design, they flourished. You are not the chosen ones. You are the accident that worked." Back on the ship, Dr. Thrax analyzed the data with trembling hands. His condition was worsening, but his mind remained sharp. If the plague was meant to activate when these devourers returned, then why is it active now? The answer came from the expedition's sensors. Massive gravitational anomalies had been detected at the galaxy's edge for weeks, dismissed as sensor errors. But when they adjusted their instruments based on the predecessor data, the truth became clear. "They're already here," Sarah said quietly, staring at the display. "The devourers. They're testing our defenses." The probes were subtle, reality distortions that barely registered on standard equipment. But now that they knew what to look for, they could see them everywhere. The galaxy's edge was being prodded, examined, tested for weakness. The Minded One's last elder, despite being days from death, reached out telepathically to James's team. The effort nearly killed it instantly, but it managed to share a critical insight. "We can feel them," the elder transmitted. "The devourers. They hunger. They see our galaxy as food. The plague was meant to leave only those who couldn't be consumed, but it activated too early. We're dying before the real threat arrives." The race against time became even more desperate. The human team split up, some continuing to explore the predecessor ruins for technology or information about fighting the devourers, others working frantically on a cure for the plague using the new data. In the ruins, they found weapons, devices that could seal dimensional rifts, generators that could create pockets of stable spacetime, shields that operated on principles human science couldn't yet understand. But all of it required operators who were immune to the exotic energies involved. Only humans could use them. Dr. Fatima al-Rashid, working with the last Etherian scientists, made a breakthrough. "The plague doesn't actually kill," she announced to the emergency council. "It converts organic matter into a crystalline form that the devourers can't consume. It's trying to protect the galaxy by making everything inedible to them. So everyone who's died," Ambassador Okafor began. "They're not gone," Fatima confirmed. "They're preserved. Their consciousness, their genetic patterns, everything is stored in the crystalline matrix. If we could reverse the process. But reversing it would require understanding sciences that the galaxy's greatest minds had only theorized about. They needed more time, more resources, more living scientists, all things they were rapidly running out of. Marcus Rodriguez, still grieving his wife, volunteered for the most dangerous mission yet. He would take a small team to the coordinates where the predecessor ship had crashed on Earth millions of years ago, now deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. The dive took them to pressures that crushed their submarine's hull until it groaned. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, they found it, a ship made of the same light-absorbing metal as the ruins, perfectly preserved. Inside, Marcus found something that made him gasp. Stasis pods, thousands of them, each containing genetic samples from species across the galaxy, and in the ship's computer, a message. To those who inherit our burden, it read, we failed to stop them permanently. They will return, use what we've left behind, save what we could not. The ship's database contained the complete genetic sequences of every species the predecessors had encountered, including many that had been extinct for millions of years. More importantly, it held the original version of the plague before it had mutated and evolved. Working around the clock, human scientists began to understand the plague's true nature. It wasn't meant to kill quickly. It was supposed to put species into suspended animation, preserving them until the devourer threat passed. But something had gone wrong. The plague had activated too early and mutated, becoming a killer instead of a preserver. As the weeks passed and the death toll climbed past comprehension, humanity faced the darkest period in galactic history. They were archaeologists of extinction, racing through dead worlds to salvage what knowledge they could. They were nurses to the dying, offering comfort to species that had existed since before Earth had multicellular life. They were soldiers training with weapons they didn't understand, to fight an enemy they couldn't fully perceive. Dr. Thrax died on the 6th day, as he had predicted, but before he crumbled to dust, he handed James a data pad. The frequency, he whispered. The plague responds to a specific quantum frequency. You can control it. His discovery, made in his final hours, would prove to be the key humanity needed, not to destroy the plague, but to tame it, to return it to its original purpose. The hunt for Patient Zero had revealed that there was no Patient Zero. The plague had been everywhere all along, dormant in the quantum foam of space itself, waiting for the right trigger, and now humanity, the accidental survivors, had to choose. Let the galaxy die to deny the devourers their feast, or risk everything on a plan to save species that nature, or the predecessors, had marked for death. The real enemy was coming. The plague was just the beginning. The volunteer center in New York had a line that stretched for 3 miles. People of every age, background, and walk of life stood in the rain, waiting to offer themselves for the synthesis program. Among them stood Marcus Rodriguez, still carrying the datapad from the predecessor ship. Inside the building, Dr. Fatima Al-Rashid looked at the sea of faces through the window. Each volunteer knew what they were signing up for, to have their immune system torn apart at the molecular level, mapped, and potentially rebuilt. Many wouldn't survive the process. We need 10,000 volunteers for the first phase, she told her team. We have 60,000 outside. The synthesis machines were a combination of human engineering and salvaged alien technology. They looked like metallic cocoons, each one connected to quantum computers that would map every possible configuration of human immunity. The Etherian scientist Velnash, in her final days, had helped design them before she finally dispersed. Marcus was in the first group. As technicians connected him to the machine, he thought about his wife, about her final words. Love doesn't care about species. Neither should survival. The process began with a warming sensation, then fire in his veins. The machine mapped his DNA, his antibodies, his entire biological makeup. But it went deeper than that. It searched for the predecessor markers, the ancient code hidden in human genetics that made them immune. Sarah Chen watched from the observation deck as volunteers writhed in the machines. Some screamed, others went silent. The medical readings were terrifying. Heart rates that should be fatal, brain activity that looked like seizures, cellular activity that defied medical understanding. 8 hours in, the first volunteer died. Then another. By the 12th hour, they had lost 40 volunteers. But the data they gathered was invaluable. Each death taught them something new about the human immune system and its impossible architecture. Dr. James Okonkwo worked with the data in real time, adjusting the parameters for each new volunteer, based on what they learned. It's not just our immune system, he realized. It's our entire biological makeup. Every cell in our body carries the predecessor marker. We're not human with alien additions. We're fundamentally hybrid beings. Lisa Chang made another discovery. The markers aren't passive. They're responsive. When exposed to the plague, they activate dormant portions of our DNA. We're evolving in real time. This explained why humans hadn't shown any special abilities before. They had never been exposed to the trigger. But now some volunteers were displaying unusual characteristics. Enhanced healing, the ability to survive in extreme environments, even limited telepathic abilities with some alien species. The Kothari representative, one of the last 3 of her species, watched the proceedings through a quarantine barrier. Her feathers had all fallen out, replaced by crystalline growths. She had perhaps days left. "You're becoming what the predecessors intended," she said weakly. "Not just survivors, but guardians." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus, still in the synthesis machine after 18 hours, began to stabilize. His readings normalized, but they were different from before. His blood, when tested, could neutralize the plague in small samples. "It's not a cure," Fatima explained to the emergency council. "It's more like a key. His modified antibodies can communicate with the plague, tell it to revert to its original hibernation function instead of the killing form." But there was a terrible catch. The process of creating these antibodies required living human bone marrow, and each donor could only produce enough to save perhaps 100 aliens before needing months to recover. With billions dying across the galaxy, the math was devastating. President Rodriguez stood before the United Nations. "We're asking every human who can donate to do so. This will be voluntary, but we need to understand, refusing means watching the galaxy die." The response was overwhelming. Hospitals set up donation centers on every human world and ship. People scheduled their donations in shifts, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. Many donated too much too fast, collapsing from exhaustion and biological stress. The first batch of the synthesized cure was ready 3 days later. Admiral Chen personally delivered it to the largest remaining Vrex colony. The warriors who had once conquered stars now numbered fewer than 100,000. General Crackstor was among the first to receive the treatment. The injection burned, and for a moment his body began to crystallize faster. Then it stopped. The crystal formations began to recede, dissolving back into living tissue. "It works," he gasped, his voice rough from days of fighting the crystallization. "By the ancestors, it actually works." But the cure came with complications. Those who received it were changed. They could hear a faint humming like the universe itself was singing. Some reported dreams of vast spaces between dimensions, of hungry things pressing against reality's barriers. The minded ones who survived the cure were affected most drastically. Their telepathic abilities were enhanced but also altered. They could sense the devourers clearly now, feel them testing reality's walls. "They're coming," the youngest minded one reported, her psychic voice trembling. "Weeks, maybe days. They know the plague has failed to complete its function. They're angry, hungry. Humanity faced an impossible choice. They could focus on mass-producing the cure to save as many aliens as possible, or they could prepare for the devourer invasion with a drastically reduced galactic population. The decision was made for them when the first devourer probe fully manifested near a human colony. It was wrong in every way. A thing that hurt to look at, geometries that shouldn't exist, matter that was simultaneously there and not there. It began to consume everything it touched, converting matter into something that existed outside normal space-time. Human weapons, even those enhanced with predecessor technology, barely slowed it down. It took the combined effort of 3 human warships using experimental dimensional shields to force it back through the rift it had created. "That was just a scout," James said grimly. "The real invasion force will be thousands of times larger." Project Phoenix went into overdrive. Every human who could donate did so on a brutal schedule. Some volunteers stayed in synthesis machines for days, their bodies pushed beyond all safe limits. The death toll among human donors climbed into the thousands, then tens of thousands. Marcus Rodriguez became something of a legend. His unique response to the synthesis process meant his marrow produced the most effective antibodies. He donated every 3 weeks, far more than was safe. Each time he grew weaker, but he refused to stop. "My wife died believing humans would save everyone," he told Fatima when she tried to make him rest. "I won't let her be wrong." The cure was distributed based on a terrible arithmetic. Species with unique abilities that could help fight the Devourers received priority. The Etherians' energy manipulation, the Minded One's psychic abilities, the Vrex's military expertise, all were judged essential. Smaller species, those with populations already below genetic viability, were given comfort care but not the cure. Humanity became death's accountants, deciding who would live and who would fade into crystalline memory. Dr. Fatima al-Rashid collapsed during her 40th straight hour of work. When she woke, she found herself connected to a synthesis machine. "Your antibodies are needed too," a nurse told her. "Every human who can give must give." The galaxy's population, once in the hundreds of billions, now numbered less than 1 billion survivors across all species. Entire sectors were graveyards, planets covered in crystalline dust that sparkled in the light of stars that had witnessed the death of civilizations older than Earth's entire existence. But those who survived were changing. The cure didn't just restore them, it enhanced them, preparing them for the war to come. Humans and aliens alike were becoming something new, something the predecessors had perhaps intended all along. As the dimensional barriers weakened and reality itself began to fray at the edges, the survivors gathered on the fortress world of Haven Prime. Humans, Vrex, Etherians, Minded Ones, Cathari, and the remnants of a dozen other species stood together. They were no longer the same beings who had existed before the plague. They were forged in crisis, bound by shared loss and united by human blood that flowed in all their veins. The galaxy's children had become its guardians whether they were ready or not. The synthesis was complete. Now came the real test. The medical ship Angel of Mercy dropped out of hyperspace near the Kothari homeworld. Captain Lisa Chang looked at the planet below, once covered in vast forests, now gray and silent. Her crew of human medical workers and the handful of cured aliens prepared for another desperate rescue mission. "Life signs detected," her sensor operator announced. "Maybe 3,000 clustered in the southern hemisphere. 3,000 Kothari out of 1 billion. Lisa pushed down the despair and focused on those they could still save. The ship descended through empty skies that had once been filled with the graceful flying cities of the Kothari. On the ground, they found the survivors huddled in underground shelters, their once bright feathers dull and falling out. The eldest, barely able to stand, approached Lisa with dignity despite her condition. "We are ready for the cure," she said simply. "We have heard the human ships bring salvation." Lisa's team worked through the night. Each injection of the synthesized cure required precise calibration for the recipient's species and condition. Too much and they would die from the shock. Too little, and the plague would consume them before the cure took hold. One by one, the Kothari began to recover. Their feathers grew back, but different. They now shimmered with an opalescent quality that seemed to bend light. When the first recovered Kothari tried to fly, she found she could see dimensional rifts, the weak points where the Devourers might break through. This scene repeated across the galaxy as human medical ships raced against time. The Angels of Mercy, as desperate survivors called them, became legend. Exhausted human crews, many sick from overdonation, pushed themselves past all limits. Admiral Sarah Chen coordinated the effort from Haven Prime, the fortress world that had become the galaxy's last military stronghold. The massive tactical display showed red zones where the plague still raged, blue where populations had been cured, and terrifying purple areas where dimensional instability suggested devourer activity. "We've saved approximately 400 million, James Okonkwo reported, across all species. "Out of hundreds of billions," Sarah said quietly. "It's 400 million more than would have survived without us. The first real devourer attack came without warning. Reality simply tore open above the colony world of New Thessaly, and things poured through. They defied description, beings of pure entropy that existed in states between matter and energy, consuming everything they touched and converting it to nothing. The colony's defense force, a mix of humans and recently cured Vrex warriors, engaged immediately. Predecessor weapons charged, dimensional shields activated, and the battle for the galaxy's survival began. General Craxtor, commanding from the ground, watched his warriors fight alongside humans who had saved them. The Vrex's tactical brilliance combined with human adaptability created strategies that actually worked. They couldn't destroy the Devourers, but they could force them back, seal the rifts they created. Push them to the quantum destabilizer, Crackster ordered, his voice carried to both Vrex and human soldiers who moved as one unit. The shared experience of the plague, the human blood now flowing in alien veins, had created an understanding that transcended species. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, New Thessaly still stood, but barely. A third of the defense force was gone. Not dead but erased, removed from reality itself. The survivors bore witness to something terrible. The Devourers were just testing them. The real invasion hadn't begun. On Haven Prime, representatives of every surviving species gathered in what they called the Unity Council. No longer separated by ancient prejudices or territorial disputes, they faced extinction together. The minded ones, their psychic abilities transformed by the cure, created a galactic detection network. They could sense Devourer movements across dimensions, providing precious minutes of warning before attacks. The Etherians, their energy forms stabilized and enhanced, worked on weapons that could damage beings that existed partially outside reality. They discovered that certain frequencies of energy, modulated through predecessor technology and focused by human operators, could wound the Devourers. Marcus Rodriguez, despite being weakened from constant donations, volunteered for the most dangerous mission yet. A team would travel to the dimensional breach point, where the Devourers were massing their main force. They would plant a predecessor device that might seal the rift permanently, or kill everyone within a light year. "I've already lost everything once," he told Sarah when she tried to refuse his request. "I won't watch it happen to the galaxy." The mission launched with a crew of volunteers from every species. As they approached the breach point, reality became increasingly unstable. The ship's hull began to phase in and out of existence. Only the human crew members, their predecessor markers fully activated, could maintain enough coherence to continue piloting. What they found at the breach defied understanding. A wound in space itself with millions of Devourers waiting on the other side. But Marcus noticed something else. The crystallized remains of plague victims were being drawn to the breach, forming a barrier. "The plague knew," he radioed back. "It was trying to create a wall of inedible matter between us and them." Dr. Fatima al-Rashid, listening from Haven Prime, understood immediately. "We can use this. The crystallized remains aren't dead matter. They're in stasis. If we could reactivate them at the right moment." The plan that formed was desperate beyond measure. They would use the plague itself as a weapon, allowing it to crystallize matter at the breach points, creating barriers the Devourers couldn't consume. But it would require precise control, and only humans could survive the energy fields involved. Across the galaxy, human volunteers stepped forward. They would pilot ships directly into the breaches, using their bodies as conduits for the predecessor technology. Many would not return. The day of the final battle, the galaxy held its breath. Thousands of ships, crewed by humans and cured aliens, took positions at predicted breach points. The minded ones maintained psychic communication. The Etherians powered weapons beyond current understanding, and the Vrex commanded with tactical genius born from millennia of warfare. The Devourers came in force, reality tearing open in 100 places at once. But this time, the galaxy was ready. Human pilots flew into the breaches, their ships equipped with plague dispersal systems modified to create instant crystallization. The barriers formed just as the Devourers tried to push through, trapping them between dimensions. Marcus Rodriguez led the assault on the main breach. As his ship entered the tear in reality, he thought he could hear his wife's voice in the crystalline resonance around him. All the preserved consciousnesses of plague victims seemed to be singing, adding their strength to the barrier. The predecessor device activated, and for a moment, Marcus understood everything. The plague, the markers, the entire elaborate system. It was never about choosing survivors. It was about creating a galaxy that could defend itself, united not by politics or force but by shared survival. The breach began to close, but the Devourers made one last push. Marcus made his choice. He overloaded his ship's core, using his own body as a conductor for all the energy. The explosion, combined with the crystalline barrier and predecessor technology, sealed the main breach permanently. Across the galaxy, Similar sacrifices were made. Hundreds of human pilots gave their lives to seal breaches, while thousands more fought alongside their alien allies to destroy the devourers that had already broken through. When the last breach closed and the final devourer was banished, the galaxy fell silent. Not the terrible silence of the plague, but the exhausted quiet of survival. They had won, but at a cost beyond measure. The galaxy's population was less than 1% of what it had been. Entire species existed only in memory and crystalline remains. Humanity had lost over 1 million souls to donation complications and the war itself. 1 year later, the reborn Galactic Union held its first council. Admiral Sarah Chen, now bearing the title of Guardian Prime, looked out at the assembly. Every face bore the marks of what they'd survived. Every species carried human genetic markers in their blood, a permanent reminder of their salvation. "We are not the galaxy we were," she said. "We are something new, something forged in the worst catastrophe imaginable. We carry the memories of trillions who fell, the wisdom of the predecessors, and the strength that comes from facing annihilation together." The memorial stations were completed, massive structures orbiting every surviving world, containing the crystalline remains of plague victims. Scientists worked to reverse the crystallization, hoping someday to restore those preserved in stasis. Earth, once considered a backwater world, became the galaxy's spiritual center, not through conquest but through sacrifice. Every species sent representatives to learn, to remember, and to honor the 1 million humans who died saving others. Dr. Fatima al-Rashid, now head of the Galactic Medical Union, continued her work. The cure had changed everyone who received it, creating unexpected connections between species. Frex warriors could sense Etherian energy patterns. Minded ones could share thoughts with humans. The Cathari could see dimensional weaknesses. They were no longer separate species but something new. A galactic consciousness bound by shared genetics and experience.